I'd just like to say, I think it was actually a God moment that I came here. Some of you would know Margaret Ando-Akai, who's now back in Ghana at the moment, and we're missing her terribly. But I was talking with her, and she said, you should do a workshop on this. And I said, oh, well, I'd love to, but, I'm at home. And she said, right now, I was in her living room. She said, right now, you send an email to Tanya. She's the Women's Ministries leader. You send her an email right now and tell her you'd be willing to do a workshop. And so I was sitting there in Margaret's, because nobody says no to Margaret. And I was sitting there and I said, I'm willing to do a workshop. And I said, you're probably already organised for this year. And I was thinking a workshop is 20 people in a side room. But sent off the email, and Tanya wrote back and said, well, our theme for this year is Who Am I? So that would fit in perfectly. And Margaret said, it's a God moment. It's meant to be. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's really, it's a blessing to be up here. It's been a blessing to listen to each of the presentations today. Now, the theme for the weekend is Who Am I? And do we have that? Yes. So what an interesting question. Who am I? So how do you respond if someone approaches you and says, who are you? Sometimes we answer regarding role. Well, I'm a teacher, I'm a doctor, I'm a pastor, I'm an architect. Sometimes we answer that question in terms of relationship. Well, I'm Michael's wife, I'm Eden's mum, I'm Beck's sister. So often, our response to that question is our justification for being in this space. I'm doing this valuable job. I belong here because I'm attached to this valuable person. And our roles and our relationships certainly make a vital part of our makeup. They help to locate us in the space that we occupy. But they only go so far. The role we play and the people we're attached to, they help to locate us, but they don't actually tell us who we are. And I just want to speak to all the women in this room who are mothers. Please hear me on this. You are more than simply a mother. I don't say that to disregard the role of a mother. I personally believe being a primary caregiver to a new generation of quality humans is a vital role, frequently overlooked. I've chosen that as my career path. I've spent the last 14 years at home with my 6 beautiful children. Well, not 6 for the whole time. But I wouldn't change that for the world. But there's more to me than just that. When the children grow up, I will still be here. And I will still be me. And I think I owe it to myself and to those around me to know who that me actually is. For the women in the room who are wives, please hear me on this. You are more than David's wife or the pastor's wife or whatever relation status you might use. Yes, you may often fill a supporting role, but you are you. Uniquely, beautifully, individually, you. Even if that is overlooked and unnoticed by the people around you. You are intricately, wonderfully, gloriously designed by the Master Creator. For the women in this room who define themselves by their work role, you might be an amazing teacher, but you are more than that. You might be a cutting-edge business executive, but you still need to take off your work shoes and find out who you are in the quiet spaces, who you are when the work clothes are back on the hanger and the commute is over. So I'll ask again, who are you? Who am I? Now, psychology tells us that there are some ways in which each of you, some ways in which each of you is like all other people. Some ways in which each of you is like some other people. And some ways in which each of us is like no other person. And I just found it fascinating sitting down there taking notes through the last 2 workshops, because Megan spoke about some of the characteristics, how we all need love. And Shanda spoke of our individual purpose. And I'm talking about how we are like some other people. So you'd almost think we sat down together and worked out our presentations, when in reality we didn't know what each other was actually speaking on. I think that's a God moment. So think about this for a moment. Let's break it down a little. Each one of us needs food and water and shelter, basic functions. Don't forget, drink water, get sunlight. You're basically a houseplant with complicated emotions. But even more than that, food and water are a good start. But there are innate common needs among all humans. And as Megan mentioned before, Brené Brown, researcher and storyteller, she has a background as a social worker and studies shame and vulnerability, has collected thousands of stories, and she has this to say: a deep sense of love and belonging is an irreducible need of all women, men, and children. We are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. This is fundamental. We are wired that way, designed that way, created by God to love, to be loved, and to belong. But let's explore that a little further. What does it mean to belong? In her research, Brené explores those questions. In her book, Braving the Wilderness, she shares some of the responses when she asked this question of people. Belonging is being accepted for you. Fitting in is being accepted for being like everyone else. If I get to be me, I belong. If I have to be like you, I fit in. I want you to just sit with that thought for a moment. But now I want you to take it another layer deeper. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Now sit with that for a moment. Cool, that is hard. Now, how many of you, when I shared this slide, immediately thought of a time when someone else excluded you, made you feel like you weren't part, you didn't belong? If you're like me, read those words and immediately think of people around you, our families, our schools, our churches, our workplaces. Somewhere, someone has made you feel unwelcome, unloved, like you didn't belong. But this one, this is hard because this is us. Are we able to accept ourselves? Now, to be honest, I should probably stop there because it's probably about enough for us to digest for one day, but I've only got one workshop, so I'm packing in as much as I can. So before I go on, I want you to understand I'm not making excuses for bad behaviour here. There are people out there who are treating people around them very poorly, saying, well, that's just who I am. That's not what I'm meaning. To accept yourself doesn't mean to treat others badly. It means to treat yourself well, and then to also treat those you encounter well. Okay, so what does that mean? It's an interesting dynamic. How do we treat others well? Well, first thing that springs to mind is the golden rule. Say it with me. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Yes, I didn't even need to put it up on the screen. It seems so obvious, doesn't it? How can you possibly go wrong with that one? It's ingrained into our minds. We've probably taught it to our children. The teachers here have probably taught it to many other people's children. But what about when the other person doesn't want the same thing that you would want in that situation? What do you do then? We experience this all the time in our relationships. John Gottman, who studies the science of human relationships, states that every fight a couple has contains two conversations that they should have had when they expressed their own needs. Said if they have a fight, they didn't have those important conversations. The simple fact is people have different wants and different needs. And I'm sure you've noticed this already. Some of you, when you're sick or sad or tired, might just want your significant other to sit with you and hold you close And yet, if he walks out of a difficult meeting and you try to cuddle and smooch him, he'll go, "Oh, just leave me alone." Ever had it happen? What you want in that situation is not always what the other person wants. Some of you in this room will feel valued if you go to a friend's house and they have tidied up especially to show you that they care about you and your friendship. Some of you in this room will feel valued if you go to a friend's house and they don't bother to tidy up, because that means you're a close friend and they don't need to impress you. It's been known for a long time that there are differences between people. The New Testament speaks of different gifts given to us by God. Romans 12, 6-8. And more recently, Ellen White, one of the founders of our church, had some interesting things to say. Children have varied temperaments, and parents cannot always give the same manner of discipline to each child. And also, take time to get acquainted with your children. Study their dispositions and temperaments, that you may know how to deal with them. Now, in these cases, she's talking with parents, but she's not just speaking about children. In a different place, she says, "My workers are different in temperament. Their ways and manners are different, but we blend in action and stand united in spirit, seeking to help and strengthen one another. We know that we cannot afford to be at variance because we differ in temperament." Differences in temperament, differences in ways and manners. Think about your family of origin. Think about your friends, your church. If you have children, think about them. There are so many differences. But if we can't trust what would work best for us, how do we relate to other people? I'm so glad you asked. So let's take a moment. I'd like you to do this exercise. I'm going to put some numbers up on the screen, and I want you to find the numbers in consecutive order from 1 to 54. It's not easy, is it? They're all different. Different colours, different shapes, different sizes. What if we make it a little bit easier? Some people are frustrated. "No, you didn't let me finish." But have a look. If you look at it again, and you have a framework to help you find where the numbers are. Each number is still unique, still different. Even when we take away the framework, now try and find the numbers. Now I'm going to really annoy all of the J's in the room who really wanted to get this job finished, and you'll understand what a J means in a minute. There's some people who go, "Just wanted to get that job complete," and I've stopped you. But what does it mean for us today? Because there are many frameworks that have been applied to personalities or temperaments or thinking styles or brain area dominance. It really depends on what you'd like to call them, because they all link in together. Now, I'd just like to point out, not all frameworks are equal. Some are well researched and others are, to quote my grandmother, total bunkum. Now, some frameworks have different numbers of categories, but there are many who fall into 4 groups. All of the ones I've listed on the screen are divided into 4 groups. Some of you might be familiar with the choleric, sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic. Some of you may have heard the leadership styles of owl, peacock, eagle and dove. The 4 is a very common framework for personality groupings. And I won't go into it today except to briefly allude to the fact that the brain is also divided into 4 quadrants, and brain function and personality are intrinsically linked. Your personality is determined by which areas of your brain are dominant. I could go off on another tangent here, but I shall remain steadfastly fixed to my course. Now, I've explored a number of these frameworks, and quite a few of them have good value. There are a lot of different ones that are very helpful. Today, I'm going to focus mainly on the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, or MBTI as it's often called. It also divides into 4 quadrants, but it goes even further and ends up with 16 different types. On your handout, you will see an overview of some of those, which hopefully will make more sense as you go through. So I'm going to briefly outline the framework and how it can help us to both understand who we are and how to relate to others. It's only a very short time frame and therefore only a very brief overview. If you wanted a full analysis, you'd need to do the proper Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. But today, hopefully, this will give you a few general characteristics. Now, being a women's retreat, we need to talk about some women. Catherine Briggs. Catherine Cook Briggs was born in 1875. She was educated at home by her parents, who were college professors. Even as a child, she had a fascination with observing the differences between people. She noted differences in personality between people who were all living effective, useful lives, and sought to understand these differences and the reasons behind them. For many years, she worked to create her own formulations, and then she discovered and adopted the frameworks expressed by C.G. Jung in his book, Psychological Types. And she spent the rest of her life studying these types and applying this knowledge to the world. Now, Catherine's daughter, Isabel, refined her mother's work to develop the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's a questionnaire to help people identify their own type, as a way of helping people make better choices and increase constructive behaviour. They wanted to help them grow both individually and in harmony with others who were different to themselves. In 1980, Isabel published a book called Gifts Differing. Does the title look familiar? Came from the same place, that verse in Romans. So before we go into what the type indicator talks about, I want to clarify some of the things that it is not. It is not a measure of your maturity, your ability, or your skill set. It's not a value. Neither one is better nor worse than another. They are simply different. It's not a goal. You don't go through and select who you would like to be. Skills are developed, but your preferences are innate. Just as a brief example, my husband his type is often labelled the most introverted introvert. And yet, when we were at Avondale studying, he was the leader of a club called Cosmos, and they were doing a fundraiser. And when Michael is doing something, he puts everything into it. So much so he was appearing up in front of worships, and he was putting out advertising, and he was doing promotions, so much so that the psychology professor labelled him as the biggest extrovert on campus. He was extroverting to achieve a goal, but that doesn't make him an extrovert. He is capable of doing that skill, but that doesn't change who he naturally is. So, some people are sort of sitting back going, I'm not sure how this relates. They're probably sitting with their arms folded. So I don't know who are the skeptics. I want everyone to fold their arms right now. Everyone fold your arms. Okay, now I want you to unfold them and fold them the other direction. It takes a little bit longer, doesn't it? You have to kind of think about it. For some people, I'm hearing people say, well, it feels strange, it feels odd. But you can do it. And that's what it's like with your preferences. You have a natural way of doing things which just comes naturally. You can do the other, but it requires a little bit more thought and intention. So, let's have a look. On your pages, you'll have what's up here in front of you. The Myers-Briggs, we measure 4 different things. Where do we get our energy? How do we take in information? How do we make decisions? And how do we organise our world? Let's have a look at the first one. Where do you gain your energy? What I'd like you to do, in groups of 3 or 4 around, I want you to think it's a good friend's birthday and you want to organise a surprise party for them. In your group, I want you just to think about where would you hold the party? What thing would you do? Are you going to have any entertainment? What specific things would need to happen? Just take a couple of minutes and then I'll call you back together with the people around you. Okay, I can see people are very excited about this party, and that's awesome. But I just want to call you back now. Let's have a general show of hands. If you're thinking of something along the lines of a picnic or walk along the beach or a nice little cafe with just a few friends, just put up your hand. If you thought to like hiring a hall or hiring a band or something, put up your hand. Did you have a look around you when the hands went up? Let's do it again. Cafe people? Notice their hands come up to here. First time they came to here, and then when I drew attention to them, they came to here. Okay, those who were going to hire a hall because you couldn't possibly fit into a house. Yeah, look at the hands, right up high. Look at them, party people. Now, just for the record, there are some extroverts here who haven't put up their hands very high or even at all. It's probably because they're either thinking types who would prefer a focused activity like doing a task together over mingling with a group, or else strong judging types who thinks things should be done decently in order and waving your hands around is not one of those things. But the extroverted perceivers, yeah, there they are, they're waving. Now, it's also worth noticing that a lot of people, pardon? And she's switched on, absolutely. Absolutely, I was just about to share a story because for my father's 60th, my mum went, okay, we have to have a surprise party. We'll call all the people from church, we'll call his relatives, all the people from interstate, and we spent the whole day trying to make sure he didn't run away. And you've seen that sort of thing happen as well, haven't you? So yes, absolutely, it would be best to identify the person's preference, not just your own. Absolutely. It's also worth noticing that many people will identify as what we call ambiverts. They're not sure that they quite fit one category or another. Now, there's always a continuum on each of these, and every binary will have exceptions. but most will tend to identify sort of as one side or the other. Even if you're not a strong extrovert or introvert, you might be leaning more to one side than the other. And when you're dealing with another person, it's always helpful to identify towards which direction they are compared to you. So you might both be extroverts, but they might be a little bit more extroverted, and you need to keep that in mind, or the same the other direction. But let's have a look at some of the differences. Now, Arlene Taylor, she has a business called Realizations. She speaks a lot on brain studies, and it's quite fascinating, but she just talks about some PET scans, so brain scans. And those extroverts, the more extroverted you are, that excuse me, tend to have a lower resting blood flow to the brain. So it's a lower internal stimulation. Now, this is an advantage in highly stimulating environments, because the introverts who have a higher resting blood flow become overstimulated very easily. The extrovert becomes understimulated very easily. The extrovert dominant pathway is activated by dopamine, which is the feel-better chemical in your brain. The introvert's dominant pathway is activated by, and I can't be sure how to pronounce this, but, oh, thank you. So obviously, there's the ambiverts in the middle, but depending which direction as to how these go. For an extrovert, energy is drained by being in an understimulating environment. You might find this for myself, working with my children, my extroverts, if we are sitting quietly at home for too long, they become exhausted. They don't cope. They can become bored, they become restless. In a classroom, they might become delinquent. They need frequent breaks. If you're trying to focus on something, you need to give the extroverts lots of frequent breaks to increase that stimulation. For an introvert, energy is drained by too stimulating an environment. And if they have too much stimulation, they will tend to become tired or depressed or sick. But they can focus for long periods of time on something that they're really interested in. An extrovert will tend to recharge by interacting with the outer world and recharge quickly, so tend to spend energy freely. An introvert will recharge by interacting with the inner world, taking time alone. And we take longer to recharge, so tend to spend energy cautiously. Okay, have a think about where you might fit on that continuum. And then we have a quick look at the next one. Sensing and intuition. How do we take in information? Now, you notice very quickly that I have highlighted the wrong letter. But that's because we use the E and the I for the extrovert-introvert, so they didn't use I for this one, they've used the N just to clarify the difference. Now, what is sensing and intuition? How do we take in information? I want you to talk to the people around you for a second. Think about your favourite place that you love to visit. Could be a restaurant, friend's home, holiday destination. Just turn to the person next to you. It doesn't have to be a big group, just the person next to you, and tell them about that place. Okay, make sure the other person gets a turn to talk. Switch over. Okay, and I'm going to call you back. I know you're in your happy places now, but I'm going to call you back for a second. And I want you to think about how you presented that information and think about what was important to the other person. You'll tend to find that the senses will describe things in terms of your 5 senses. They might say something like, when I was a child, I had a swing under a beautiful tree, beautiful green leaves in summertime, and I could look off and see the hills in the distance. You might find that they will be very literal, very descriptive of sensory information. Now, an intuitive might say something like, I loved to go to my grandmother's house. It was like something out of a fairy tale. They will use metaphors and those sorts of things to describe, not being as literal. Senses will prioritise the information from their senses. Intuitives will prioritise ideas, abstract thoughts. Now, I didn't mention earlier, approximately a quarter to a third of the population are introverts. So most people will be, did I say introverts? Most people will be extroverts, and about a quarter to a third will be introverts. And with sensing and intuitive, the majority of our population is sensing, and about a quarter will be intuitives. Now, there is a story of a couple. They've been away on holidays. They're heading back to the airport and they're running late. There's been traffic. They're not sure if they're going to quite make on time. The husband's driving along. He turns to his wife and he says, "What car is this?" She said, "It's a Honda." "No, what kind of car?" "It's a Honda Accord." "No, what sort of car?" It's a blue Honda Accord." Now, he is asking a very broad question. She is giving a very specific answer. What he actually was trying to find out is, what rental company does this car belong to? So I know which company I should drive to so we don't miss this plane. But he didn't give all of the information. He thought it was obvious. She was being very specific and descriptive. Now, often with senses will tend to think in processes that you can follow. I have this thought, I move to this thought, I move to this thought. You can see how each of these thoughts connect, and you can follow along nicely. Intuitives tend to think something like we would describe a ski jump. We have this thought, and we take off, and we land somewhere over here, and nobody is able to tell how we got from here to here. Now, my lovely sensing friends over here in the audience are laughing at me because we've had these conversations many times, because I'm one of those intuitives. So we have to move quickly because I know you're all going to want to go to tea in a little while. So we go on to the third continuum. How do we make decisions? So we've looked at how we gain energy, we've looked at how we take in information. Now, how do we make decisions? I want you to stop and talk amongst yourselves again, because I want you to imagine that you're on the team organising this conference, and you've actually planned an excursion for Sunday morning. You've got a wonderful excursion planned, but there's only 14 places on the bus. You've got 18 women who have signed up, who put their names down to go. They all want to go. What are you going to do? How will you decide who gets to go on that bus? And write down the criteria you would use to decide. Okay, and I'm going to call you back again. I'm going to call you back. I could hear people. I could hear some people calling out, "I'd take my car." If there's a will, there's a way. They're all going. Now, I want to just talk to you about your answers in just a second. But before we get to that, thinking types will tend to make decisions they will try and solve the problems. They will try to encourage the other person into problem-solving mode. They try to establish facts, weigh up the pros and cons, step out of the situation for objectivity. A feeling type would tend to listen and empathise. They'll tend to help the person express their feelings, be supportive, and step into the situation with their friend. I want you to imagine this scenario. You've driven home, you've stopped in front of your garage door, you've gotten out of the car to open the garage door, your car rolls back down the driveway and crashes into the mailbox. I want you to imagine you call up your best friend. Hey, you're not going to believe what I just did. What's she going to say? Oh, honey, how are you? Are you okay? Think of those sorts of things. You can imagine your friend saying that. You imagine when you talk to your husband, what's he going to say? Did you forget to put it into park? Why didn't you put your handbrake on? We have a classic thinking, feeling distinct. Now, I just want to point out at the moment that this one is the only one that has a gender bias. The majority of men tend to be thinking types. The majority of women tend to be feeling types. So that can help us get a general guide as to what they're likely to be, but not in every case. So it's important to remember that about a quarter of women are thinking types. There's a good chance they're not here because the thinking type women that I know say, I don't want to go to a women's conference, everyone's just going to sit in a circle and cry. Direct quote. But they are there, they do exist, and they actually have a hard time in our society because they don't fit the stereotype of what a woman should be. Because they tend to be logical. They're not so based on connection, they're based on logic and task orientation. So we need to remember them. Even if they are not here today, we need to remember them as well. So having a look, knowing that there's probably not very many T or thinking type women in this audience, I just want to share some of the answers that I've had when I've run this in a different setting. The feeling types are some of the answers that I heard calling out. I'll run the excursion twice. I'll take my car to fit the extras. We'll book another bus. Or cancel that excursion and plan another one that everyone can do. But the thinking types were very quick. Oh, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. First names, first in, best dressed. If you're in a school or a childcare, well, whoever's going to need the least discipline will take the easy ones. We'll use it as a reward for good behaviour. If your name's on the board at the end of the week, you go on the excursion. Or sports teams, whoever has the highest scores or the best record gets to go. The thinking types come up with a list of criteria very easily. And you can see these types with small children coming out very quickly. For the thinking types, they tend to focus on competition and dominance activities. They view hierarchy as the default way to sort society and to resolve issues. So therefore, they will seek to hold their position within that hierarchical structure. You know, you can often hear, and go with the gender stereotype, it's often little boys, I can run faster than you. My dad's stronger than yours. It's very much about hierarchy and competition. The feeling types tend to focus on inclusion or exclusion. They tend to view community as the default way to sort society and resolve issues. Therefore, they seek to ensure that they will be part of the group. You'll hear little girls saying, if you do that, I won't invite you to my birthday party. You can't sit with us. You can hear it. They speak in different languages because they're focusing on a different way of structuring society. Okay, our fourth continuum, judging, perceiving. How do we organise our world? Okay, I've got a story to share for this one. I have a friend who is a very strong judging type. And she had seen a TV show called Surprise Chef and came up with the suggestion on a Saturday night, okay, let's do something fun. How about I'll come over to your place, we won't make a plan, and I'll just look in your pantry and figure out what to make for tea. with whatever you've got. Now, for her, this was something novel. This was something fun to do based on a TV show she'd seen. But for my sister and I, that was life. That's how we prepare every meal. Or another story. We had some friends over. The husband is a strong judging type. The wife was a perceiver. They came for lunch one Sabbath after church. Now, I'd prepared a pasta meal for lunch. Nut meat, mushrooms, onions, passata, spices, eaten with pasta spirals. Now, during the afternoon, the two guys, so my husband and the other husband, got to talking about how much they loved spaghetti bolognese and how long it had been since they had eaten it. Now, my friend and I were confused because we'd just eaten pretty much that meal, except that it had spiral pasta instead of spaghetti. But for the two gentlemen, it was not at all the same thing. And that evening, we didn't complain, but they set about preparing the meal they had been dreaming of. You know, nut meat, mushrooms, onions, passata, spices, etc., eaten with spaghetti, while leaving the lunch leftovers sitting in the fridge. Now, the thing I love is that while I tell that story, half of you are rolling your eyes at the boys, the other half are staring with me with your intentional polite face, thinking, who is this crazy lady up the front? Of course they're different things. So let's have a look at judging and perceiving. The judging types are good at making things happen. Their best work is done when prepared in advance. And they can relax once a plan is in place. They'll feel unsettled until they have a plan. The perceiving types are good at making do. Put them in a situation, they'll make the best of whatever circumstance it is. Their best work is done when responding to a situation at hand, and they can relax whenever they have options available. Now, a judging type, the weakness is they can tend to make a decision too quickly without taking in all the information. And the perceiving types, our weakness is we can tend to hold off on making a decision until there's only one option left available, and so that's the one we go with. So the judger, let's get it settled. And the perceiver, no, let's keep it open. I have another picture which I didn't put in here. And there's the wife is there going, I've made a schedule for every day of our vacation. And the husband's going, there's a plan for every day of our vacation? Now, judging types also tend to have a bit of a hierarchical structure. A judger will tend to be able to prioritise things more easily than a perceiver. The judging brain's natural framework, because they need to make decisions quickly, they need to take in information, quickly prioritise what's important. And they will do this in every aspect of life. So when it comes to types of music or dress sense or food flavours, one will be defined as better or worse than another. Perceiving types will more naturally take information without necessarily prioritising that information. So apple pie ice cream is just as valid as double chocolate or basil and strawberry. So the things are different, but of the same value. Now, this has been an incredibly brief overview of the types. My goal is just to introduce you and give you a basic understanding of them. And your handout has got a list of it's got some websites on there that you can do a free online questionnaire if you're interested in finding more about what your particular type might be and how to relate to other people. There's some really good information out there. And it's also got an email address if you want to make contact to ask any questions about that. But some of you are still wondering how to relate this to your life. Once you have that framework, like with the numbers at the beginning, once you have that framework, you can use it to help ensure that you and those you connect to have your needs and preferences met. I have found when talking with people about type, we tend to go in this sort of flow chart. Step 1, I'm different from other people. Step 2, that's okay. Most people that I've talked to individually about this have felt that they were different all their lives and they weren't quite sure what to do about it or whether that was okay. And they go, oh, there's a reason that I'm different. And it's okay to be me. And then they can, once they've looked at that, then they can look at other people and go, oh, and there's a reason that they are different from me. And that is okay. It's okay for them to be who they are. So a quick cheat sheet. If you know an extrovert, they will need frequent time with people. They will need a stimulating environment. If you know an introvert, they will need frequent time alone. They will need quiet. And if that is your significant other and that you find that they just want time alone, away from you, they're probably not rejecting you. They're probably just trying to recharge. If you know a sensing type and you're giving them information, try and make sure it's detailed, factual information. Try and use a structured presentation. If you know an intuitive, allow them to use their imagination and abstract thinking. Allow them to express theories, speak to them in metaphors. If you know a thinking type, use direct, logical, and factual communication and expect the same from them. Don't ask them, do these jeans make me look fat, if you don't want them to answer. If you know a feeling type, make sure that you have connection, you deal with relationship and emotional communication. If you know a judging type, they are more comfortable if they have structure, if decisions are made and plans are in place. They will probably be more comfortable if the house is tidy and the desk is clear. If you know a perceiving type, they desperately crave freedom. They want to have options available to them and they want to be free to respond to a situation as it unfolds. So, what do we do with that now? On your handout, you will have a square. It's a funny looking square. Why would I put that on a handout? I put it there from something I read, from something Brené Brown says. She speaks about the need to be vulnerable, to be authentic, but she says it's important to be vulnerable with the people who you can trust. So on that square, it's just small because it forces you to edit. I want you, whether now or when you go back to your room or when you go home after the weekend, to write in that square the names of the people that you are going to try to open up to be vulnerable with, to share a little bit about who you are deep down at your core. It might be something you've learnt talking about the personality types. It might be something you have learnt in one of the other workshops or presentations. It might be something that you might have lived with that person for 20 years and you've never told them. Think about something, some way you can share who you authentically are. Because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world. Because our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. Let's pray. Father God, I pray that each head bowed here will recognise your creative work in their lives, in their brains, in their personalities. Be with each one as they learn to accept themselves, as they work to accept others, as we work together to form the kingdom you intended. For by this shall all know that we are your disciples if we have love one for another. Amen.